Welcome everyone to session 4 of Founder Basecamp. This is our final lecture-based session for cohort 2, excluding the demo day, which will happen next week. Let's just talk for a little bit. Most founders, they ideally understand their product pretty deeply, but that's, I think, table stakes for success. Many founders do struggle, however, to communicate why anyone should actually care. So in Founder Basecamp, you spent the last few weeks building these systematic approaches to validation, customer discovery, your go-to-market strategy. But now we need to translate that strategic thinking into narratives that actually make your audiences want to act. That's where the gap is. The gap is between the technical work, the product work that you're doing, and then the successful storytelling. And the gap that exists isn't just your capability. It's about structure and communication structure. Your job is to make your audience feel inevitable through this clear storytelling that ends up surviving through their mental filter and then continues to exist well beyond your initial pitch. So let's think through how you can actually communicate your vision. And we'll get into that today. But I want to just kind of briefly touch. We've had 4 sessions that kind of thought through who you are as a founder from first principles to market execution. Session 1, establish your foundation through idea validation and market fit analysis. You learn to define problems with precision, test your demand systematically, and then establish success metrics that actually predict business outcomes rather than vanity signals. In session 2, you developed your market intelligence through customer discovery and persona building. You refined techniques for pinpointing target users accurately, conducted interviews that ideally revealed whatever kind of actionable insights rather than just confirm your own biases. And then you ideally are translating that user feedback into product direction. Session 3, last week, built your growth engine through go-to-market strategy and just first customer acquisition planning. Ideally, you shaped your value prop that will resonate with real buyers and thought through the approaches to winning initial users in a competitive market that exists. Today, we're completing this toolkit and we're focusing on communication. We're focusing on how to construct pitches and teasers and story structures that end up converting your information into conviction for whichever audience that you're looking towards. Next week, we will have our pitch day, and that represents your demonstration from all of these different sessions. We'll have selected teams that will come to pitch to judges and receive feedback on both their content and their delivery style. I bring this up before getting into the topic for this week, just because each session provides the necessary tools that the next session ends up requiring. Your storytelling framework helps you communicate all the strategic work that you've done in the past few weeks in an effective manner. And before we dive into the storytelling, I just want to kind of connect on last week's go-to-market work, and that will be a nice little segue into today's lecture. Session 3 focused on 4 different principles. The first one is define your customer markets with precision. Start narrower than feels comfortable, and segment by behavior, by urgency, and craft unique selling propositions that are anchored in meaningful differentiation. Second one is align your go-to-market flywheel so the direction, positioning, distribution, and customer experiences all reinforce each other to create a compounding growth element. Third one, match execution to context by choosing the right growth mode that actually fits your product, and optimize retention and conversion for your specific project. And then finally, always just adapt to the Web3 ecosystem. If you're using a token, use them to bootstrap, but always let utility and value metrics actually drive sustainable growth. The bottom line is, from last week's recap, is build a go-to-market strategy that ends up creating early traction and that compounds through a good customer experience. So let's take that insight, make them investable through a compelling narrative structure. So I briefly touched on this in the first slide, but I would say it kind of bears repeating. I would say a lot of crypto founders, they like to pitch their technology, whereas smart investors and smart customers, whatever audience, they like to fund and purchase stories. So let's think about the future. You've built something that works. Users adopt it. Metrics are proving that there is value. But then you walk into an investor meeting and something breaks down. Um, that gap isn't always your fundamentals. It's oftentimes that you lack a good narrative. Many founders are able to present technical solutions when investors and the audience actually need market inevitability. You need investors to walk away understanding what you built, not why it matters. You need to have investors walk away understanding why it matters, not just what you built. I was flipping those two up in my head. But even sophisticated investors can't really sponsor anything that they can't explain to their partners. You give them the features, you give them the flows, but they need the reasons and the timing for why your company actually matters. That is what we are going to discuss. How to translate that layer between your company and their conviction. I'll start off with a just very brief statement. Your data informs, but stories transform. Your stories bind the facts to context and emotion, so your messages survive the initial skim. Investors will process dozens of decks a week. They're hunting for reasons to say no. So you have to make sure that the yes is inevitable. A tight narrative structure answers who you serve, what changes in their world, and why this moment matters. But what separates successful pitches from forgotten ones is that someone else can repeat your core story in one breath and sponsor it internally with actual enthusiasm. Your pitch doesn't end when you leave that Zoom meeting. It lives or dies when that investor explains your company to their investment committee and partners. If they cannot retell your story clearly, you will not advance. I'm putting 3 anchors that ultimately survive the investor's mental filter. Everything other than this will get forgotten. One precise line that captures your entire value proposition. This is your elevator pitch distilled to its absolute essence. Who you serve, what fundamentally changes in their world, and why it matters now. Use language that is so clear and so concrete that your grandma could repeat it accurately after hearing it once. The second one is one human scene, 20 seconds of before. That's easy to picture. When does the pain occur? Who's affected? What is the operational consequence? This proves that the problem is real and the status quo is insufficient. And then finally, one proof point, a credible signal that the problem and solution both exist. Revenue stage companies will end up showing paying users, signed intent, good retention data, and earlier companies than that will probably use some type of proxy signal. So it could be a quality waitlist, design partners with clear use cases, or letters of intent with concrete terms. And I want to leave this page with a fundamental rule. One strong, defendable proof point ends up beating 5 semi-soft, meh claims every time. Investors can smell weak validation instantly. A good investor can do so. So give them something that is actually solid to anchor their growing belief in your vision. Everything else that we'll talk about supports these 3 anchors. Your market size, your competitive landscape, your team credentials, your financials. They're important, but they're secondary. So always nail these anchors when you're telling a story. Your first slides must function as a standalone story. Each element performs one specific job. Your headline and vision state the promise and future that you're building. This earns the investor skin. And again, investors will decide in 30 seconds whether to continue. So you have to make those seconds count. The problem quantifies the pain the customer feel in a concrete term and makes it immediately relatable. This establishes the stakes for your entire presentation. Don't say that something is broken. Show that the specific cost of it being broken and show it in terms that investors will understand. Your solution demonstrates the transformation in one clear sentence that connects the pain directly to the outcome. Keep the focus always on the user visible improvements rather than the technical features that might impress engineers, but ultimately confuse your audience or confuse your investors. The market side shows the scope and timing with clarity. This justifies scale potential that makes your opportunity worth investing in. Investors need both the opportunity size and evidence for why this moment represents the optimal timing for such a company to exist. And finally, you have the evidence, which presents the minimum metrics that build genuine confidence in execution capability. Choose metrics that support your narrative. Don't choose vanity numbers that sound impressive, ultimately don't matter. And just some general design guidance. I'm not a great designer. As you can probably see through my slides, I probably write a little bit more. Don't use my style for these lectures for your investor pitches. Have one idea per page. Create large readable type. Use single purposeful images. Avoid busy UI screenshots. And ultimately just use plain, concrete, and repeatable language. And ultimately just skip adjectives without data. Those are kind of just fluffy kind of statements that you can make. Make the opening unskippable. I like the slide. Ultimately, like I've been saying this, but investors make very quick decisions. They get tons of decks per week, per day. There's a lot. And so they ultimately will probably look at the first few slides and then determine whether or not they keep reading. So you always need to front load your strongest category. Lead with your most compelling element, strongest value prop, the sharpest stat, most vivid problem moment that you can share. Don't build towards this kind of crescendo effect. You need to start with impact and then maintain your energy throughout. Short and visual, that always will win. One idea per page, diagram over paragraphs. Investors will skim on their phones between meetings. So just design for the reality of how people are visual or actually reading your deck. The investor lens matters. Answer the scale, the model, distribution, timing, and team elements pretty quickly. These are their mental buckets. So you need to map your story to how they're framing it and thinking through how they're evaluating you. Invite deeper connections by hinting at advantages without revealing everything. You want to create a forward pull towards a follow-up conversations without giving away what makes your approach so unique and so special. There's an element here where creating a little bit of mystery combined with your credibility is good, and it beats this exhaustive explanations that I think a lot of decks go through. Always just kind of be very attentive to detail, polish. It does reflect on you and whether or not you are capable of executing. Have consistent grids, legible charts, a mobile-friendly layout. And ultimately, like this is something that when I was in private equity and venture capital, like having a founder that had attention to detail was extremely important for me. And then finally, I think those are kind of like the main things. Again, a lot of people are reading it on mobile, so design for mobile first as well. I kind of think this is an important element. I kind of touched on some structural principles that end up separating like these compelling pitches that we've seen from information dumps. I mentioned front load essentials before. This is who you serve, what changes, a key proof point. They should all be in your opening pages. Don't make investors hunt down for your core message. Then you should have one idea per page with supporting elements that end up reinforcing rather than complicating your central point. There's a clear headline, a brief explanation, purposeful visuals that actually advance the understanding. There's an element with people who are reading so many decks that you have to manage their cognitive load. And when you're competing for limited attention, you need to be able to access why and get into their brain of like why it matters and why you're interesting to talk to. Show outcomes rather than telling the benefits. I mentioned this before. Use diagrams to explain processes. Use labeled screenshots that demonstrate user value. Have callouts for metrics that prove specific claims. I think this concept of visual processing ends up actually beating text for speed and retention when you're competing against other decks for this attention from investors. And I think the reason why this works is that investors operate under extreme time pressure. The visual information that they receive in your deck actually processes much faster than written explanations. And a clear organization that you can provide them builds a level of credibility and attention to detail by demonstrating just a systematic thinking. So I put like everything is sort of like a book. So I put together a little story spine of how you can keep a framework that keeps your narrative coherent under scrutiny. Character, conflict, and change. My three C's. My three C's. I don't know if that's backwards for you guys, but that's where I'm putting it. The character represents the specific customer profile with concrete details about the role, operational environment, key constraints they face. I don't want you to default to, here's a hypothetical example, businesses need stable coins. That's not good. That's not precise. You want to be precise. Be something like e-commerce merchants in Mexico and Colombia process $50,000 to $1 million in monthly revenue, and they struggle with cross-border payment settlement through traditional banking, and that forces them to maintain a large cash balance. That is your character, not they want stable coins. Show why they want it. The next C is conflict. It shows the measurable cost of status quo. Touched on time waste, financial impact, operational risks that the customers experience regularly. Quantify this pain so investors actually understand the stakes immediately. It could be inventory mismatches cost their target customers X amount of thousands of dollars in lost sales. The final C is change, and it illustrates the life after your product in user terms rather than technical specifications. I want you to focus on measurable outcomes that create genuine value. Every slide that you have will ultimately establish stakes or demonstrate transformation. Nothing exists isolated from your central narrative. When investors probe deeper, your story has to maintain coherence because it has to follow a logical spine. Celia mentions, I wish to get examples for the three C's. It will depend entirely on your company. So I did mention one about an e-commerce merchant that is looking to process X amount of monthly revenue. Like that is just specific details on the character. This is stuff that we've talked a little bit about in the last few sessions as well. This is just sort of structuring it into your story spine. What I want you to do is not just say, these are what's happening. It's getting specific into the elements associated with it. So if you can tell me who the customer is in detail, if you can quantify the pain so that people can actually understand the stakes immediately, and you can illustrate that, what happens after this change occurs, that's getting 90% of the way there. So focus on the measurable outcomes that create actual value for your character and how you can solve the conflict for them. So ultimately at the end of the day, just pick one spine. I put three options here and then just stay consistent throughout. I like the founder origin kind of spine. It works when you have like this unique insight from lived experience in the problem space. I would generally just say like use that when you discover specific problems through direct exposure, and you ultimately possess advantages that others don't. That kind of just explains like who you are and why you built it, and why, like how you can actually pull listeners into you as a person, understanding this whole concept. Customer journey, we touched on this a little bit. I think this works well when you're kind of going the before and after case for a customer. This works well when you kind of have a pain that is fairly universal, and it's visceral enough that anyone can relate. Yeah, so I think use the customer journey and the approach of just like who you are as a hero, solving the villain, or overcoming the protagonist, overcoming the antagonist, aka like the villain, aka like the problem in the situation. When these problems are so obvious that anyone in your space knows about it, and that you can actually show that this approach is actually superior. And then timing shifts. I think this is valuable when you can show that there are external changes, regulatory, geographically, licenses, or whatever it is, that show that these changes can enable that your approach is working. So this could be technological developments, regulatory shifts, or behavioral changes that create opportunities that your solution specifically captures. Ultimately, like at the end of the day, don't mix these approaches. It's a story structure, it's a narrative spine. Stick with them. If you have fragments of each, it will confuse the core message. So pick one, stay consistent. Um, yeah, that's kind of the main thing. So there's an element of how you can there's a storytelling technique where you kind of start in the middle of the action. You start where the narrative is right in the middle of the action or the conflict, rather than the beginning with the background setup or context. This middle of the action approach actually works kind of well because our brains are wired to pay attention to stories in progress. When you start with action, investors are actually immediately want to know what happens next, which makes them receptive to your solution. So in this situation, start in the middle. Get specific about who you serve, how you serve them. Add concrete details that add and create credibility. Paint these vivid friction moments using present tense. When problems occur, who gets blocked? What's at stake operationally? Have a anchor metric that quantifies the scope and impact. It could be settlement delays. It could be conversion losses. It could be that working capital is trapped, using some of my hypothetical examples from earlier. Something that ultimately gives investors a concrete sense of scale. And then pause before introducing your solution. There's this kind of concept where you can create forward momentum towards a resolution without jumping immediately to your product fixes. Let the problem breathe so that investors actually feel genuine need for better approaches. That's where you come in. So it's basically like a 4-beat structure. The moment and present tense, quantify the metric, the operational consequences, and then pause before the product mention. You can keep this entire setup very, very concise too. And I've been mentioning this. I'm going to run through this page extremely quickly. I just want to very much iterate specificity will always win. If you have concrete details, it signals market knowledge. If you have vague language, it suggests that you are guessing and you are not an expert in this field. We talked about this in, it may have been session 2 or session 3, but the ideal customer profile. Use observable attributes that investors can verify immediately. This could be their segment, size, workflow tools, geographic concentration, whatever is relevant for them. And that beats much vaguer language around, do you need better inventory management? Instead, say stuff like the mid-sized retailers that operate X amount of locations, they use legacy point-of-sale systems. And now they want to use our new stablecoin to amplify and improve the turnover ratio associated with it. Bad hypothetical example, but still a hypothetical example. Describe the current workarounds in plain operational terms so people understand exactly how things work today. It could be manual steps. It could be legacy limitations. It could be third-party combinations that they've assembled on their own. Make it clear. And then finally, maintain just quantifiable language throughout the entire presentation. Use specific units, use ranges, use frequencies, use good measurements rather than just qualitatively claiming anything, because anyone can say anything. But if you have specific numbers that back it up, it makes it a lot better and really showcases the solution at hand. So ultimately, I have an audit test for this. If a statement can't be measured or observed by third parties, rewrite the statement until you can. The sharper the description, the better the market is to evaluate what you were doing way more accurately. So yeah, that's it. Frame the solution. It's one sentence. Problem to clear, measurable outcome. Hold yourself to this constraint. If you cannot explain your solution in one sentence, you do not understand it clearly enough to be raising funds at that point. Focus on user visible dimensions that customers actually care about. This could be speed improvements, cost reductions, reliability increases, control enhancements. Avoid internal mechanisms that fascinate the engineering side of your business, but don't actually translate to customer value. Emphasize the outcomes that satisfied customers repeat to their peers rather than features they might appreciate but end up not discussing. What specific benefits do your happiest customers mention when they're recommending your solution? That is what you need to get, and that is your statement. And ultimately, my audit test for this is, can someone else repeat your solution description and have it make sense? If not, again, you need to simplify it. So yeah, this is sort of like how I think investors look at various decks through different lenses. Adoption, quality, and trajectory. Adoption shows who uses it, how many, with a focus on target market relevance. Quality numbers ultimately become meaningless if you're representing the wrong segments. You want to tell, again, a good story. The mid-sized retailers across X amount of states is better than tens of thousand users or something like that. Ultimately, like, your quality will prove that users stay, return, and expand their usage over time. You have retention rates, engagement depth, satisfaction scores that ultimately will demonstrate lasting value creation. If you have those numbers, put them in your deck. Then trajectory, which demonstrates momentum through growth rates, acceleration in key metrics, and ultimately, at the end of the day, improving unit economics. Present these trends with labeled points, but don't overwhelm people with raw number tables that ultimately require them to analyze to understand. So present the facts as you want them to be seen. Trends will ultimately always beat trends with context will ultimately always beat raw numbers. Quality engagements beat user quantity. You want to have it's better to have a few extremely engaged users rather than many unengaged users. And then specific commitments that you receive are always better than general interest. Understanding your competitive landscape. Always be mapping the alternatives, including your competitors. Identify the main approaches that customers use to solve the problem that you are looking to solve. This could be, right now, what they're doing. They could be using legacy tools. They could be creating their adjacent solutions. They could have manual processes. Map all of these as alternatives. Most teams, I think, are obsessed about their direct competitors while ignoring that there are often status quo solutions that customers actually use. Those are often your real competitive threat. And then I want you to focus on 3 to 4 factors that customers genuinely compare when they're making decisions. This could be total cost, implementation speed, reliability under stress, and compliance requirements. Avoid all the technical features that you might find interesting unless the customers actually use them as their decision criteria. Highlight where you outperform with durable advantages that others can't replicate easily. This could be exclusive partnerships. It could be proprietary data access, switching costs, regulatory approval, certain types of network effects. Always just avoid generic claims like, we are faster and cheaper. Every one of your competitors is also saying the same exact thing about you. And then just have a one-line positioning. I have it right here as an example. We win with insert your ideal customer profile who need insert your desired outcome because we deliver insert your unique advantage better than insert the current alternative. You don't need to use that verbatim, but it is a way to just illustrate who you are and how you're positioning your company. Ultimately, concentrate on the lasting advantages that compound over time. These are your network effects. These are data that benefits from improving scale. It could be regulatory barriers that limit new entrants. Your feature differences are often things that your competitors can copy. So what can you actually create and showcase that is fundamentally uncopyable. And that's where you kind of really can showcase that you are different and better and investable or being used by customers. Um, and then honestly, early stage investors, they back founders who they trust to adapt and persist through setbacks. The biggest risk isn't actually your competitive market. It's the execution that you have under stress and uncertainty and the difficulty it is to just be a founder. Experienced investors, they know that startups, they rarely succeed with their original plans. What you were doing today is going to be very different than what you're doing 2 months from now or a year from now. So they're actually betting on you as a founder who end up navigating this ambiguity, and then they persist through obstacles. If you can show that, that's extremely important. So there are 3 qualities I put here that investors evaluate for founders. The first one is authentic. You have an authentic motivation that explains why you care deeply about this specific problem. Second one is you have relevant credibility that highlight your skills and experience that you need to solve this challenge. And then finally, self-awareness. Can you actually acknowledge that there are risks and explain how you can address and mitigate those particular risks? Every company in the world will have some type of risk. If you cannot acknowledge the fact that you might not have the best payments experience or the best stablecoin experience and you're building a stablecoin based payment product, find a reason to mitigate why that risk actually exists and why you can actually show that you are self-aware of your strengths, but also your weaknesses too, and how you can kind of bridge that gap. So yeah, that's really kind of the main thing. Your story bridges the vision and your credibility. Connect what you want to build to why you specifically can make it real in a competitive market. The focus is not just on impressive accomplishments, but why your experiences in your past matter for this particular company that you are building. Ultimately, your goal is to show that you are resilient, show that you learn from setbacks. You will have obstacles. That's a fact. Not everything works perfectly. Investors expect this. They understand this, but they want to see how you will respond when things don't go to plan. So include an honest assessment of you as a person, your capabilities, what you are lacking, and how you plan to address it. It could be through hiring. It could be through partnerships. It could be through advisors. At the end of the day, the investors are backing you as a founder just as much, if not more, than the idea that you are pitching to them. What you are and the story that you present is what sells both the vision and your execution capability. Okay, so I'll just share, we'll end soon. These are kind of like 5 traps that I've noticed that kill otherwise strong pitches. You put vague advantages. You say something like, we're better. Instead, do something that is really defensible. Say something like, we have exclusive partnerships with 3 major distributors, and that gives us preferred pricing and priority access. The second one is that many people ignore alternatives. I want you to sort of change that and map it to a real landscape. Everything that customers use today, map it out, not just your venture-backed competitors. Again, these could be your alternatives, your status quo element. The third one is product-heavy narrative. I want you to think about it and elevate it to a market model distribution and show your results. Your features matter, but your business model and your go-to-market matter way more to investors. The fourth one I've seen that kill a lot of pitches, thin validation. Ultimately, this will strengthen if you have explicit commitments. Don't just say that users love us. Show that they love you with actual measurable impact and a measurable statistic for it. And then finally, just don't use abstract language. Use numbers, workflows, concrete outcomes. At the end of the day, pressure test every claim. Would a skeptical investor repeat this to their investment committee after reviewing your deck? If it's maybe or it's a no, refine it until it is clearly a yes. And so I put together a proven template. Begin with a clear purpose and tagline. that makes your value proposition immediately obvious. Build along this problem solution narrative using some of the covered frameworks that we talked about today, and just ensure that the elements that you put into your deck actually reinforce the central story that you're trying to show. Validate with market timing and traction to support your growth thesis. Show the business model sustainability and acquisition strategy with concrete examples. Address the competitive landscape honestly while positioning sustainable advantages clearly. Present you as a team and your team, what you are focused on, what relevant experience that you have. Explain how you address any credibility gaps. And then close with specific funding requests and detailed capital use that is tied to more concrete milestones that ultimately will advance your business significantly. I would say there are many structures out there. There are many effective structures. They exist. You'll see different structure organizations associated with this. This sequence just follows a narrative logic. Just adapt it based on your unique strengths. It could be that you have a legendary team. If so, lead with your credibility. If you have exceptional traction, front load the validation element to it. But the crucial principle is that you want to maintain narrative consistency regardless of whatever structure you use. Every slide should advance the same core story about why your solution matters now and why you are the right team. So I'll close on the final second to last slide here. 5 principles that I think separate the memorable from forgettable pitches. Have a clear one-line promise that anyone can repeat. This ultimately becomes your elevator pitch, tagline, core message. Get that first. Second, make the problem real with concrete and measurable items, measurable terms. Do not use vague problems. If you use vague problems, that gets vague attention. Specific problems with quantified impacts end up getting investor focus. Frame your solution as obvious and simple outcome to that problem. The connection should feel inevitable and not something that is ultimately super clever. At the end of the day, people like simple things. It ultimately beats out complexity every day of the week. Prove it works with adoption, quality, trajectory, evidence associated with it. Investors will back who you are just as much as what you build. So show motivation, credibility, self-awareness. Your personal story does matter. Keep this problem solution impact framework visible when you are drafting your slides. Every slide should reinforce your core narrative. If it doesn't advance your story, then you need to cut slides or fix those slides up. This is a framework to just turn your information into a narrative that people will remember and support going forward. So make sure your story travels well beyond the pitch room. And that's really it, because your pitch just opens up your startup story. Tell it with clarity, tell it with conviction. Others ultimately will become excited with you, and they'll help you write the next chapters in your story. And I'll just close with this. Winners do not necessarily have the best products or the largest markets. They're the ones who have the clearest stories about problems worth solving and the compelling reasons why they are the right team to solve those effectively. So take these frameworks, apply them systematically to your materials, test it with friendly audiences first, iterate until your story flows naturally and survives skeptical questioning. Fundraising, selling, it's all about sales. It's all about storytelling. So master the narrative, and a lot of these elements become significantly easier down the line.